midnight screams.
My God, I will never give anyone a ride ever again. I was taught from a young age to never talk to strangers, and I've followed that rule to the letter throughout my childhood. But things change when you grow up. You have to interact with strangers more often, especially when you're lonely. When I was a truck driver, the endless stretches of empty road got to me. I started picking up hitchhikers if they were heading to the same destination. It was the perfect solution to the loneliness, and I made a few friends that way. My job was the best in the world until that fateful November night. After a drop-off at the designated warehouse, I was on my way back to the depot, a long journey through the night. Hours later, I saw a man on the side of the road, clutching a black bag, holding a sign with my exact destination written on it. Normally, if it was this late, I'd just ignore him and keep driving. But for some reason, I felt like I owed this man something, and a bit of company on the road couldn't hurt. I pulled over and cracked the window, asking him where he was headed. Even though I could read the sign perfectly well, he just pointed to the sign and looked up at me. An uneasy feeling started to brew in my gut, but it was too late. I told him to get in. It was a terrible mistake. He climbed into the passenger seat. He was dressed in all black, a silver chain dangling from the pocket of his outer coat. I was a little timid at first, but composed myself and shook his hand. His hand was cold, horribly cold. Not the biting cold of being outside, but more like the damp, clammy cold of a fever. It was unnatural. I studied his face. He looked to be in his late 50s, with a graying beard and severe eyes that put you on your guard. I cleared my throat and introduced myself. He just grunted something gruff and unintelligible that might have been a name. I just said, "Nice to meet you," and turned my attention back to the road. It was probably best not to start a conversation unless he initiated. He didn't look like the kind of man you wanted to misspeak around. After a few minutes, I started to notice the way he was constantly rustling through his bag. The metallic clanking grated on my ears. It was bizarre. Another hour of driving passed, and he still hadn't stopped. I also noticed he had been staring at me for a long time, which was sending shivers down my spine. I wanted to shudder. Usually, if I had a quiet passenger, I'd turn on the radio to break the silence, but it had broken last week, and I hadn't gotten it fixed. Trying to get him to stop staring at me, I cautiously asked, "What's in the bag?" I regretted it the second I said it. He looked me dead in the eye, his voice a low rasp. "Mind your own business." I was a bit shocked and tried to play it off as a joke, though deep down I knew it was anything but. As the journey wore on, the rustling grew louder, mixing with strange groaning sounds he was making. Deeply unsettled, I started thinking of a way out of this. I couldn't do this for another 3 hours. Now he was banging the object in his bag, then stopping, followed by a scraping sound, like a knife against something else. I couldn't take it anymore. I pulled the truck over to the side of the road. I didn't want a confrontation, but I tried asking again, "What's in the bag?" Again, the same reply, "Mind your own business." I nodded and told him I thought the back tire was flat, asking if he could get out and have a look while I got my tools. He looked at me with pure hatred but got out of the truck and walked around to the back. I slammed my foot on the gas and took off. In the taillights, I saw him watching me with a twisted grin. His hands, I now saw, were covered in blood. That image haunted me every time I closed my eyes. When I got back to the depot, I tried my best to forget the man, but then I realized he'd left his bag. Of course, my curiosity got the better of me. I wish it hadn't. The bag was filled with metal tools, all of them looking like instruments of torture daggers, shackles, rope, and iron bars, and I realized they were all stained with blood. I should have taken the bag to the police, but my fingerprints were all over it now, and I was afraid things would get complicated. So I took the bag home, went through it again, and my blood ran cold when I found, at the very bottom, a photo of my truck, one of my license plate, and a photo of me holding that very bag. I barely slept, but I finally managed a few hours. Now, I definitely couldn't go to the police. They'd pin everything on me. But then, I decided I had to. I put the bag in a cardboard box and was about to head out the door when I saw it. The photo of me holding the bag was nailed to my door, along with a scrap of paper with a single scrawled sentence: "Mind your own business." This is why I never stay at roadside motels anymore. I've been a truck driver for a long time, and I've seen all sorts of things on the road. Some things haunt me for years, some stick with me to this day, and some probably will for the rest of my life. This is one of those stories. I'd been assigned a ridiculously long cross-state haul, a 10-hour drive. The radio was just playing garbage, and I was starting to droop with fatigue. Night had fallen hours ago. It was late, and I decided to find the first motel I saw and get some sleep, good or bad. I didn't care. I wish I hadn't. Pulling in, I scanned the place. It looked awful. Peeling paint on every wall, grimy windows, the sign was missing letters. The strangest thing was that the parking lot was completely empty. Normally, that would be a clear sign to stay away, but after driving all day, I didn't have the energy to get back in the truck and find another place. I walked up to the front desk. No one was there. I rang the bell. Still nothing. I waited a few more minutes and rang it again, repeatedly. Annoyed, I turned to leave when a voice suddenly spoke up. I turned back around to see a toothless old man with a wide grin. He welcomed me to the motel and asked how he could help. I told him I needed a room for the night and that I wanted one with a window facing my truck. I always ask for that at strange motels. For some reason, it makes me feel safer. The old man fumbled around for a bit and then threw a key with a room number at me. I paid up front since I'd be leaving early in the morning. As I was walking up the stairs, I heard his voice mutter, "Sleep well." Then he let out a soft chuckle. That should have been a red flag, but I was too tired to care. When I got into the room, the first thing I noticed was that it didn't face my truck, as I'd asked. All I could see was a dumpster on the other side of the building. The bed was comfortable and the room was a decent size, but something felt off. There were dark stains on the carpet and grime all over the walls. In the bathtub, there was a large plastic bag, hiding something big inside. I lifted the corner of the bag and almost threw up. A pig's head. Not a clean butcher's cut, but ragged and torn. It was disgusting, but seeing the cockroaches crawling on the walls, I decided against a shower anyway, pulled the curtain shut, and tried to forget what I'd seen. I wasn't woken by my alarm, but by the sound of voices outside my room. It was 2 a.m. Who was still awake? I figured it was just other guests and tried to go back to sleep. But then I heard the sound of a key sliding into the lock. My key. I shot out of bed, ran into the bathroom, and hid in the tub right next to the pig's head. The shower curtain was drawn, but I noticed a small hole, eaten through by termites, that I could peer through. The door swung open, and someone stepped into the room. Through the hole, I saw a man in a ski mask walk over to the bed, holding something in his hand. He threw back the covers and cursed under his breath. I heard the old man's voice from the front desk call out, "What's wrong?" The man in the mask replied, "He's not here. Must have left earlier than we thought." I watched the man walk out, a wave of relief washing over me. But then he stopped and turned back towards the bathroom. My heart stopped. I tried to shrink into the bottom of the tub, though I knew it was useless. He stood there for a long moment, then spat something into the sink and left. Once I was sure they were gone, I got out, grabbed my bag, and bolted. Using the fire escape on the side of the building, I ran to my truck, got in, started the engine, and drove off. As I was leaving, I glanced up and saw a figure in the window staring down at me, a grotesque, toothless smile on his face. I didn't look back. I just drove. About 20 miles down the road, I was pulled over by a highway patrol car. The officer asked if I knew the back door of my truck was wide open. I said I didn't and got out to check. A large portion of my cargo was gone, and many of the remaining boxes had been slashed open. I told the officer the whole story about the motel and what had happened. He shook his head in disbelief, then said something that terrified me. "That roadside motel, the owner died 4 years ago. It's been abandoned ever since." I'll never forget the terrifying night my truck broke down at 4 a.m. The life of a trucker is one of constant travel, and with travel comes incidents, and with incidents comes danger. I had come to accept this the day I decided to make this my career. Back then, my youthful vitality made me think nothing bad could ever happen to me, that I was invincible behind the wheel. How naive I was. I had just crossed a state line when the drowsiness hit. The long stretch of road was deserted, and I was sick of the radio shows. Suddenly, the truck started to slow down, even though my foot was pressed on the gas. A shiver of alarm jolted me awake. I sat up straight. The truck crawled a few more yards and then died, completely. Confused, I sat in silence for a while before unbuckling my seatbelt and getting out. The harsh reality hit me. I was out of gas. I cursed myself for being so absent-minded, vaguely remembering the warning beep from earlier. Just as I was about to call my boss, I heard a voice behind me. I spun around, holding my phone up as if it were a weapon. A man was slowly approaching. He looked to be in his 40s, with graying hair and a patchy mustache. He seemed to be chewing tobacco, and he walked with a slight limp. "Out of gas, friend?" His voice was a slow, gravelly drawl. I shrugged, told him I was fine, and turned back toward my truck. "Got a place not far from here. Can get you some gas." I didn't believe him. Too many things were wrong with this picture. Why was he wandering around in the middle of nowhere at this hour, right when my truck ran out of gas? I told him I had a reserve can and didn't need his help. I got in the truck and locked the doors, just wanting the man to leave. I watched him disappear behind a line of trees on the side of the road. I called my boss, who said he'd sent a tow, but that it would be a while. Exhausted, I fell asleep right there in the driver's seat, feeling a little safer with the doors locked and the strange man gone. I woke from a fitful sleep to find the truck moving. I was disoriented at first. Then I remembered the tow truck. It was strange they hadn't woken me, but I figured maybe they'd tried and I was just too sound asleep, plus the doors were locked. I looked outside. It was still pitch black. I tried to figure out where I was, but there were no signs along this stretch of road. Cracking the window, I shouted towards the tow truck. "Hey, where are we going?" Why wasn't he taking me straight to a garage? A moment later, the road veered off into a deserted rural area, almost straight through a forest. In the distance, a large warehouse loomed. It looked like we were heading for it. Unable to get the driver's attention, I called my boss to see what was going on. He sounded extremely confused and told me the tow truck wouldn't reach me for at least another hour. That's when I completely lost it, screaming into the phone. Then who the hell is towing my truck? My boss immediately called the police and told me to find a way out. I launched myself out of the truck on the spot, throwing the door open and jumping out. I was winded for a moment and lay there trying to recover. The tow truck had stopped, the driver probably having heard the door open. I scrambled to my feet and ran. I had no idea where I was, so I just picked a direction and bolted. I glanced back, and my heart froze. It was the same man from before. He spat out his tobacco and jumped down from his truck. My heart was pounding like a drum, but I kept running. A gunshot cracked through the air. I dove to the ground, scrambling behind the nearest tree. The man was stomping through the woods, yelling for me to surrender. He couldn't see exactly where I was, but he must have had a general idea. I crawled to a fallen log and held my breath. The man was getting closer, yelling, "Come on now, and I'll make it quick." By now, I was trapped. If I moved, he'd hear my breathing. He stopped right next to the log, scanned the area, and then took off in another direction. Breathing a sigh of relief, I peeked out, only to lock eyes with him from about 100 yards away. I made a mad dash for my truck and slid underneath it. Bullets hammered against the metal shell. There was no escape. He was here. Just when I thought it was over, I heard sirens in the distance. The man swore and disappeared into the forest. I struggled out from under the truck to meet the police officers who had just arrived. 2 of them took off after the man. They asked me what happened and took me to the station to give a statement. I told them everything, including about the warehouse I was almost taken to. The place had been sealed off. When I asked what they found, the officers told me it was better that I didn't know. I can only shudder to imagine what would have happened to me if I had stayed in that truck that night. One thing I know for sure, that man is still out there, and I can only pity the poor soul who runs into him next. I wish I'd never seen what was on the side of that road. As a driver, I go to places I don't want to go. I see things I don't want to see. I experience things I don't want to experience. But those challenges have made me who I am today, and that's why I love this job. You never know what's waiting around the next bend. However, not knowing also means you can't be prepared, and there are times when I don't make the right choice. I just can't. I was in England at the time, hauling a load up to the north of the country. The sky was pitch black, with only a few stars scattered about. For some reason, my eyes kept drooping, and my hands kept fiddling with the radio. A few minutes passed like that, and then I snapped awake, nearly slamming into something caught in my headlights. A body was lying motionless on the ground. I pulled over and got out, approaching it cautiously. "Sir, are you okay?" I asked, tentatively. No reply. I moved closer to check for a pulse and then froze. There was no need. Blood pooled beneath the body from obvious stab wounds. This person was dead, and I needed to call the police. I dialed 999 and explained the situation. They said they were sending someone and told me to stay put. A few minutes later, I heard shouting and the sound of heavy footsteps pounding on the asphalt. I could see the silhouettes of two men running past, one of them carrying a bag. I knew exactly what was inside. My heart hammering against my ribs, I sprinted back to my truck. Why was this happening to me? The question pounded in my head. The two men had reached the body. One of them threw the bag down and ran to his car. I hadn't noticed it before, parked. On the other side of the road, the second man charged towards me, trying to grab onto my truck. I threw the door open, hard, right into his face. He screamed in pain and fell to the ground. I only knew one thing to do: run. I floored it, getting out of there as fast as I could. I felt a wave of relief, thinking I'd escaped. That relief didn't last long when I saw headlights behind me. I was being followed. Of course, his car was much faster than my truck. It started gaining on me. Knowing I couldn't outrun him, I decided to use my size advantage. I waited until he was right up close, then slammed on the brakes. My whole body lurched forward. When I recovered, he was gone. I had no idea how I hadn't hit him. Seeing a sharp bend a few yards to my left, I could only guess he'd turn off there. Once again, I sped away, wanting to make sure the other guy didn't catch up. I drove like a madman for a few minutes until I noticed something in the middle of the road up ahead. It was two cars, both of them. I recognized them as belonging to the two men. They had set up a roadblock. 1,000 thoughts raced through my mind. Had I stumbled into something so serious they had to kill me? Why not just run? What was I going to do? I mentioned before that sometimes I make the wrong choice. This was one of those times. I drove straight through their roadblock without braking. The police arrived on the scene and questioned me about the accident and the two wrecked cars in the middle of the highway. I told them everything. One of the men was taken to the hospital, the other had escaped on foot. Investigators found fresh tire tracks nearby and concluded he'd gotten away in another car. It turned out they were gang leaders who had murdered the man I found. The victim was identified as a rival gang member. I still curse myself that the other one got away. And somehow, I have a feeling I'll see him again. I heard something in the back of my truck. The mind is a fragile container. Fill it too much and it will break. Don't give it enough and it will decay. But feed it the same thing over and over and it becomes familiar. Everything becomes mundane, they say. Over my career as a driver, I have witnessed enough horror for any 10 lifetimes. It has broken my mind. When I hear a noise in the dead of night, I don't think it's normal. I'm terrified. All the terrible things come flooding back. The snap of a twig behind me in the woods is enough to send me into a panic. My experiences have made me paranoid, but my paranoia has also saved my life. It felt like I'd been driving for days. On and on, down this road, then that one, then the next. My eyes were glued to the asphalt ahead, my stomach was empty, and I was desperate for a break. My Radiohead playlist was about to end. I pulled into a gas station and filled up the tank. After paying, I drove over to the station's parking lot. It was almost deserted, with just a few scattered cars. The air there sent a chill down my spine, though I couldn't say why. Shaking off the eerie feeling, I went inside to grab a coffee and some food. About an hour later, I got back in my truck and hit the road. I'd been driving for a good while when I heard a clattering sound. I slowed down, scanning the road around me. There were no other cars. Where did that sound come from? I kept driving. A little while later, I heard it again, louder this time. What was going on? Utterly confused, I continued on. After another 20 minutes, the clattering was constant. This time, I knew exactly where it was coming from. Inside the truck. If I wasn't always so suspicious, I probably would have dismissed it as something mechanical. But I couldn't lie to myself. I pulled over, got out, and walked around to the back. The first thing I noticed was that the lock had been broken. There were pry marks on the container doors. It made no sense. I threw the doors open. Inside, everything was in its place. No one was. There, no crates had shifted. At first glance, it seemed fine. I locked the doors again and got back in my cab. I knew someone had broken the lock, but maybe they hadn't been able to get the doors open. I was still uneasy, but at least I was sure nothing was in there. I drove off into the deep night. Hours passed. Then, suddenly, I was overcome with a profound sense of dread. There was something in the back of my truck. I knew it. I pulled over again, took the gun from my glove compartment, and purposefully walked to the back. I threw the doors open. I raised the gun. Inside, once again, there was nothing. I couldn't believe it. I knew something was in there. Lowering my gun, I turned to leave, and then I saw something move. Someone was climbing out from behind the crates and standing up. A pitch-black figure was standing at the far end of the container. I pulled the trigger, firing shot after shot, but the mysterious figure was unfazed. It started moving towards me, impossibly fast. As it got closer, I pulled the trigger again. Click. The gun was empty. I dropped the gun and slammed the doors shut, feeling immense pressure from the other side as something rammed against them. I managed to get the latch secured and immediately called the police. They arrived quickly. I explained the situation. One officer opened the doors while the other covered him. They both went inside, searching behind the crates. A few minutes later, they came out and said they couldn't find anyone. But there was one thing of note. They found a carving of a body with his throat slit on the innermost crate. The knife was still stuck in it. They checked for fingerprints but found nothing. A few weeks later, I was driving down the road when I heard the clattering again. This time, I didn't have the courage to look. I just told myself it was my mind playing tricks on me. God help me. Yes, something followed me for 200 miles through the mountains. I haven't posted in a while because I just got back from a work trip. Something happened to me on that trip. Something terrible. Whenever I close my eyes, I'm afraid that things from my past will come back for me. The events of this last haul have only darkened that past. My mind tries to suppress everything, but another part of me knows it isn't over, that the things that once haunted me will return. I was hauling a load through the mountains. My phone had no service, and the radio was silent. There was only the sound of nothingness. For miles and miles, it was just me, my truck, and the road ahead. It was peaceful, refreshing, exactly what I needed after years of being haunted. After 2 hours of driving, I stepped on the gas, wanting to get out of the mountains before dark, though at this rate, it seemed unlikely. A little later, nature called, so I pulled over. As I was taking care of business, I noticed something in the distance. This was the first time I saw it. The creature looked like a large man. I was about to call out when I realized something was wrong with its face. I slowly understood that this was not a person. What was shocking was that it didn't look like any animal I'd ever seen either. It was looking right at me. The hour-long silence was finally broken by a loud crack as the creature charged straight for me. I sprinted back to my truck, scrambled into the cab, and fumbled the key into the ignition. My sense of peace was shattered. I slammed on the gas, something I've been doing a little too often lately. Just as the truck started moving, I saw the creature burst from the trees onto the road right behind me. I sped up, but so did it. Finally, the truck hit about 15 miles per hour. I looked in my rearview mirror and saw it standing in the middle of the road, staring after me with what looked like anger. If you could call that thing a face, it must have been a person with a horrible deformity. It had the body of a man, but the posture of a wolf standing on its hind legs. Its face was too large, its eyes uneven, its mouth sunken. I shook my head and kept driving. Another ghost for my mind to bury. Another reason for my therapist to tell me I'm crazy. Another long stretch of road. I was finally nearing the end of the mountain range. Night was falling. I had almost forgotten what I'd just seen. The radio started to crackle, and my phone showed 1 bar of service. I felt relieved. For the first time in a long time, I smiled. The smile vanished when I glanced out my window. On a high, rocky outcrop to my side, the figure of the man was clearly visible. Its head was turned, fixed on my truck. My heart dropped into my stomach. My fear intensified when I saw it leap from the rock, scrambling down the hillside towards me. How could it have gotten here so fast? There was no way a person on foot could have beaten me here, but I was too confused to think, because it was about to catch up. I accelerated, but the truck was gaining speed too slowly. The man was closing in, almost reaching the back of my truck. I saw a bend up ahead and, checking my mirror, saw that he was about to jump onto the container. Just then, I yanked the wheel hard. The creature missed its jump and went tumbling down the side of the hill. I drove for miles more in the deep darkness, realizing that the radio had gone quiet again and my phone had lost its signal. Shouldn't I be out of the mountains by now? I pulled over to check my map and was horrified to discover I'd taken a wrong turn. I had followed signs to a board that read Road 9. Looking back, I realized the board was warped and upside down. I was an idiot. I should have known it was a side road, because if the sign were facing the right way, it would have pointed in the opposite direction. I was too panicked at the time to notice. Looking at the map, I saw there was nowhere to turn around on the road ahead. Sighing, I started driving again. As I did, I felt like I saw something in the trees. Every so often, I'd catch a glimpse of something moving along the edge of the forest, but it would be a few miles between sightings. I didn't want to think about what it was. After a drive that felt like an eternity, I reached a turnoff and began to turn the truck around. Just as I finished the maneuver, I froze in terror. It was standing in the middle of the road, right in front of me. This time, I got a better look. He was a big man, tall and muscular. and his face was just as I'd seen before, terribly deformed. It started walking towards me, fast. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't stay here, and I couldn't back up. I locked my doors and hit the gas, hoping to scare it. For a second, I thought it worked, because it started to move to the side. Then I heard it grab onto the passenger side of the truck. I fumbled for the keys in my pocket and locked the doors. Just in time, the sound of the handle being violently yanked was terrifying. Half a second later, and it would have been inside. I swore and gunned the engine. The man started banging on the window. With every slam, my heart skipped a beat. It was the most terrifying moment of my life. For some reason, I cracked the window open just a bit. Instantly, it shoved its hand inside. I scrambled to roll the window back up. It screamed and pulled its hand out as I swerved off the road. I kept driving, never once looking back. When I got back to the main highway, I blasted the radio, saw other cars, and almost burst into tears. My phone had service. I called my boss and told him everything. Of course, he didn't believe me. He just told me to take a few days off and that he'd schedule an appointment with my therapist for the morning. On the busy highway, I felt completely safe. I don't think I've ever been so happy to be in a traffic jam. Lying in bed that night, I tried to process everything. As I glanced out the window, I thought I saw something looking in. But to my surprise, I slept straight through the night for a solid 16 hours. I will never drive on a mountain road again. There are ghosts on the road tonight. Lately, I've spent too much time staring out my window, looking at things that aren't there. It's not because I'm going crazy, but because I'm not the man I used to be. Before, I was a skeptic, a rational man who lived by logic and his senses. Now, I don't know what I am. I only know that I'm sick. I've stopped seeing my therapist, and I've started drinking again. Anyone who has read my previous stories will understand what has driven me to this. The things I've experienced have pushed me to the edge, but I'm not writing this for sympathy. I'm writing because I have to get it out. I can't keep it locked in my head any longer. It will tear me apart. Since I became a truck driver, I've been through a lot. Some things, in retrospect, make a certain kind of sense. Others will forever remain a mystery. This story is one of the latter. It was late, as usual, and I'd been driving for hours. The night was thick, the evening shadows having long since swallowed the valley. The static from the radio lulled me into a hypnotic state. My foot was on the gas, but my mind was somewhere else. I must have been in this state for the last 100 miles, just staring into the endless abyss of the road. Suddenly, I snapped out of it. There was someone standing in the middle of the road ahead. I wanted to stop, to slam on the brakes, but I couldn't. My leg was frozen. In horror, I watched as the truck hurtled forward. I braced for the sickening sound of bone and metal colliding, but it never came. No impact, no scream, no screech of tires, just profound confusion and the question of what had just happened. I didn't look back. I just kept driving straight into the night. Hours later, I had to stop. I couldn't drive anymore. My eyelids were heavy, and it wasn't safe to continue. I reclined my seat into a bed and fell into a deep sleep. A terrible nightmare of silence and sickness consumed me. I was alone on a desolate mountain ridge when a deafening roar echoed like a landslide. The ground began to shake. A frantic banging rained down from above, and the sky turned a deep crimson as if splattered with blood. The banging grew louder and louder, morphing into a roar, a thunderous clamor like a war breaking out. I woke up. The banging wasn't in my head. It was coming from outside my truck. It was the most furious sound I had ever heard, the scream of some primal rage. I grabbed my gun and crept to the window. Outside, the silhouette of someone was standing there, looking in at me. I could only make out its general shape, no details, but it was tall, unnaturally tall. It stood in a drooping posture, like a wilted flower. I raised my gun, cocked it, and aimed. The figure seemed to melt into the blackness, fading away until it was gone. I got in the driver's seat and drove until I saw the sunrise. When dawn finally crept into the sky, I felt a sense of peace. I pulled into a gas station, almost sobbing with relief. I filled up the tank and paid, unable to comprehend what had happened the night before. I didn't understand why I had to be the one to face these demons. As I stood looking at the side of my truck, I groaned. Carved deep into the metal were 4 words: "You will find no peace."